Let me read you one sentence of Mr Javid's witness statement. He said this: "I felt that the elected Prime Minister was not in charge of what was happening in his name and was largely content with Mr Cummings running the government." Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. But let me just say at the outset, and I don't say this as any disparagement on this committee or this inquiry, but there is a whole circus that can be built up in the media and elsewhere around the internal battles between individuals. And some of that is natural and healthy. You know, you have tensions between civil servants and SPADs, between all of those and ministers, and of course between ministers. I, by the way, worked very closely with Sajid Javid. In fact, I worked for him when I was housing minister. I like him, I respect him. I think he's a great operator and decision maker in the way we were just describing. So I got no beef with Mr Javid. But equally, I don't think that's quite right. I think Dominic Cummings, certainly on diagnosis, but also in trying to galvanise direction of travel, was much needed, some grit in the oyster. I think if you look at some of the things he said, we may come on to this, but the obvious one I think of is the osmosis between professions from outside of government in government. Funnily enough, Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance are great examples of this. I mean, when we came on to the vaccine trials and all the rest of it, having someone who has not only been a scientist, who knows how government works, but also been in a major multinational, taking a drug from trials to commercialisation, I mean, it's just gold dust. I think Chris Whitty was superb as well. And one of the things I think Dom Cummings had noted and observed is sometimes Whitehall can feel a bit like a closed shop. So I want to give you a sense of which I think he correctly identified some of the structural challenges without getting into the he said, she said, frankly, soap opera of Westminster bubble politics. The broader question you raised about whether he was actually, Boris Johnson was a puppet, I'm afraid I don't find that a serious allegation. I think Boris Johnson certainly relied on his key advisors. By the way, I think you have to, if you're going to get through the work, particularly in a pandemic. I don't think, looking back at Prime Ministers past or present, if I look at Theresa May, or if I look at Tony Blair and the role of his Chief of Staff, his Director of Communications, it is natural. And if you present me something in a specific scenario, I'm happy to comment on it. But and Boris, just like anyone else who occupies that incredible role, and I feel some empathy with anyone who's done the job of Prime Minister, because I covered it for a month, and I think that made me a better Secretary of State because I could see quite what the pressures were the Prime Minister has to deal with. But you've constantly got this challenge of wanting to control the levers that affect government policy, but also knowing that to run an effective government, you need to delegate. And of course, you should delegate fundamentally through your Secretaries of State and your ministers, but you also delegate with advice and reliance on your special advisors, just as you do through senior members of the civil service. That is natural and proper, and I just don't accept the characterisation that there was some sort of puppet regime.